The President indicated that we need to pivot back to fiscal issues facing this country and facing the Congress. This after a year of a little sense of urgency on perhaps the most pressing and challenging domestic issue before us. And of course, issues like Syria and foreign policy issues have to be addressed, but we have had a year in this Congress, this current Congress, to address our fiscal issues, knowing that we were moving toward a drop-dead date, fiscally, of September 30th. And here we are now, more than halfway through September, again beginning to take up the issue that is going to direct the fiscal future of this country. The clock is ticking away, and we have spent little time addressing this issue and preparing for what is coming. So here we are, once again, careening toward one more fiscal cliff. The American people are sick and tired of this. I think the Senate and the Congress is sick and tired of doing this, and yet we find ourselves once again careening up against a deadline, knowing that we have to provide funding to keep our economy moving forward and keep our government from moving forward with essential services. Clearly, we can all argue for a number of things that don't need to be funded or can be postponed, but there are essential functions of this federal government that can't be handled any other way, and we have to provide that funding for it. National security being the top priority, homeland security. We continued to see issues in terms of providing safety for American workers at their workplace, for our military and the tragedy that occurred yesterday at the Naval Yard. These all come under the rubric of providing law enforcement and homeland security enforcement for our people. So these are essential functions. And unless we come to some agreement by the end of this month, we're going to shut all that down. Our troops won't get paid. Our homeland security people won't get paid. A whole number of other essential functions will not be able to take place. So we have a lot of work before us and very little time to do it. We also know that very quickly, shortly after the end of this month, if we don't pass an ongoing resolution to provide for funding while we work out some of our differences, we also will be addressing reaching the national debt limit. And we're going to have to address whether or not to raise, and if so, how much to raise the current limit at which we are able to borrow money from. We are today looking at a debt limit of about unimaginable national debt of $16.7 trillion and growing every day. All of us who have seen the debt clock clicking away are astounded at the rate we spend and how much we have to borrow in order to cover our spending because the revenues do not match the spending. We've been in a spending addiction here for decades, as if money just falls from trees or can just be printed down at the Fed and we don't pay any consequences for that financially. We've been in a 5-year limp growth of this economy, timid growth that's not putting people back to work. Our economy is not working well, and yet we still are spending way beyond our means, and that also has to be addressed. In the last 20 years, federal spending has grown 63% faster than inflation. And so it's clear that without changes, mandatory spending, including that interest, is going to consume 3/4 of the federal budget in just one decade. Almost half of that federal spending will go towards Social Security and health care entitlements. In 2002, that percentage was 25%, and now it's 45%. Far too little has been done to address this runaway spending train. Instead of waiting for another crisis to hit, instead of governing from one fiscal cliff to another, isn't it time that we work together on a plan to reduce our debt and curb the rate of mandatory spending? This is a matter of extreme importance. It can't be solved with a deal at the 11th hour. Now, the fact is, there's been a lot of talk around here about putting us on a path to fiscal solvency, but no real action, and the clock continues to tick. Excuse me. So I would like to ask the President and the Senate Majority Leader, at what point do they think we should start acting on a plan to reduce our debt? 17 trillion? 20 trillion? 25 trillion? At what point, Mr. President, at what point do we say this is unsustainable? This is driving us toward insolvency. We need to take action. How much red ink is too much? When will the President draw a red line on debt and borrowing? When pressed, the President says, well, he actually has a fiscal plan. Just continue to raise taxes, pass another one of his stimulus spending plans, last one didn't work too well, and adopt his budget that doesn't even have the support of his own party. Clearly, the President is unwilling to lead on our fiscal crisis. And absent that leadership, I am urging my colleagues here in the Senate, Republican and Democrat, let's focus on this important issue. Let's put something on the President's desk and ask him to either sign or reject it. But let's stop waiting for the White House to come forward with a plan, because their plan is going nowhere. It doesn't have the support of either side of this body, Republicans or Democrats. So I'm urging the Majority Leader to focus the Senate's attention on reducing our debt, growing our economy, and getting Americans back to work. The best way to grow the economy and secure our country's fiscal future is by creating a long-term budget plan that focuses on restructuring mandatory spending programs, reforming our tax code, and cutting unnecessary federal spending. This has been a mantra of mine ever since I came back to the Senate. I came back for this very reason, and here we are 3 years back from the 2010 election, when the public was urging us to address this issue, still have not accomplished what we came back to do. And it's because we have not had leadership at the White House from this President to address the underlying issues here that are so plain, that are so before us, that are so consequential to our fiscal future. And when you hone it down to what it means to individuals, whether it's saving money to be able to send their kids to college, whether it's getting a decent job after you graduate with a huge debt and be able to pay that back, whether it's getting middle-class people back to work that have been laid off for years, getting our economy moving again at more than a timid 1.8% or 1.5%, stumbling along after 5 years of recession, the policies, whether you think they're right or not, frankly, haven't worked. So isn't it time to deal with something that everyone knows we need to deal with, and that is excessive spending, this addiction to spending, plunging into debt that is holding us back from doing what we need to do. I'm committed to working toward a solution to address our debt, to strengthen our economy, and help provide full-time jobs for Americans, millions of Americans that are without those jobs. It's time to stop procrastinating. It's time to start acting. It's time that the President and this Congress stop delaying the hard choices and start representing the American people who sent us here. It's so unfortunate that we cannot rely on the President, the leader of the country, to act. In fact, he's announced he won't even discuss this incredibly important issue that determines the financial viability of our country. The President says, I won't negotiate with Congress on the debt limit. I won't negotiate with Congress on the resolution coming before us to fund the government going forward. How does this provide results to the American people? How can we work on a plan to reduce the debt if the President refuses to even negotiate it? Now, he's willing to negotiate with President Putin of Russia, but he refuses to negotiate with Congress on how we can address our rising debt. This isn't leadership. We can't rely on President Putin to pull us out of this one. Mr. President, I yield the floor.